Formula One as we know it, for those who don't know, it's a highly technological advanced sport. So they churn out these beautifully engineered pieces of equipment in a fraction of a time for it to be used in their car, which can travel over 220, over 230 miles an hour. So when you think about things like that, the advancement of technology, they even take things from aeronautical and space engineering so they can make their cars faster. But then you're thinking about this and you're looking at the gym, and this is how I observed it. I'm just like, well, this is not very technological advanced.
Hey, welcome to the Bodies Built Better podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Tan, and I'm so grateful for you and that you're with me today. And I have a favor to ask. So last episode, I spoke with the incredible Christina Carlson, the founder of Kiki K and Dream Life. Your Dream Life starts here, and Dream Life products. And she was talking about obviously dreaming and dreaming big and achieving your goals. And she told me about her incredible goal, which was reaching 101 million people to dream and go after their dreams. And that got me thinking about this podcast and what my dream was. So I've decided that I need to dream a little bit bigger because this podcast is going so well, but it could be going so much better. And so my favor to you is if you could help me reach 1,000 downloads per episode. How you can help me get there is just by either rating this podcast 5 stars, leaving a review, subscribing if you are on YouTube and and hitting the like button. All of these things will literally take you 30 seconds, and if you decide to leave a review, maybe 60 seconds. It really helps the podcast reach more people, and it shows them how this podcast could help them in their life. I really try and bring on a diverse range of guests, whether they are elite athletes, whether they are coaches, whether they're scientists or health professionals, or everyday people doing extraordinary things, because everyone has a story, and I truly believe we can learn something from everyone. So I would so appreciate if you took 60 seconds of your time to help me get this podcast to even more people. I would so appreciate that. And on this episode today, I talk with strength and conditioning coach and co-host of the Unapologetically You podcast, Tulshi Varsani. And this episode was really fun. We've actually had a chance to chat over on her podcast where she had me on, and it was so easy to have a conversation with her. And she's so great. She's so thoughtful and in depth with how she thinks about things. And the great thing about people like Tulsi and those who really think about, whether it is a question, whether it is a concept, a system, or whatever it is in life, they really deep dive, and it gives others an opportunity to see a different perspective. And that's what I really love about this conversation. It just opens us up to hearing obviously how she thinks through processes and situations, and potentially how we could take from that as well. So this was a really fun and enjoyable conversation. We do talk about her book, Happiness Within, and how she wrote that book and the challenging times that she's been through, in which she talks about through the book and how she overcame that, and also about her work as a strength and conditioning coach and her work within Formula One. Super fascinating. I love this conversation. I hope you enjoy it with Tulshi Varsani. Tulshi, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Welcome to the Bodies Built Better podcast.
Thank you for having me. I can't believe, I feel like we've already recorded half of the podcast in our out of the recording.
The pre-podcast.
I know. We're on fire. We're ready to go.
We're on fire. If only we'd recorded everything as soon
I
as we
don't
started
think anybody
talking.
wants to hear that. No.
Well, maybe they do. You never know. But what people need to know is that this is actually only the second time we've even like met on screen, had a conversation. The first time was when I had the pleasure of being on your podcast, which was so much fun. And I I feel like we just have so many similar values and we're just aligned, and it's why it was so much fun, and I'm so happy that, we've connected and we get to chat again. And at the end of the podcast, I remember you were telling me more about yourself, and I'm just like, "Wait a minute. I need to get you on my show because I've got questions." So I'm glad that you get to be here today. And the first question that I wanted to start with was, for those who don't know who you are, I would love to know, what is one thing about yourself that you would want them to know?
Oh my gosh. People who don't know me, the one thing is I really challenge my friends to get to know me. Like really challenge my friends. So basically I've written a book, Happiness Within, and that is my pride and joy at the moment. And within that, this is a very honest reflection of, these are the challenges that I've been through. These are the circumstances that I've overcome. And this is how I've overcome them. And as I'm writing it, it's almost like, having that openness and vulnerability has been something that I've had to learn. And I can get on with a lot of people. People call me, charming, and I'm very extroverted, but I'm not. I'm really not. I don't know where it comes from. I think I've amalgamated both of my parents' personalities, but I feel like I need to retreat to get that energy. And as an adult, now I've understood that. Like Susan Cain's book, Quiet, just was so amazing for me, because I'm like, yeah, I'm not quite an introvert. I'm not quite I'm an extrovert. I'm like kind of a mishmash of both. And there's certain things that I enjoy. And I think COVID, despite it being very challenging for people around the world, it really helped me go, I kind of like my little hermit mode, my inner sanctuary, like working, the efficiency that I got from working on my own. So I was like, how can I cultivate all these things? And so sometimes, I'm being very open with you, but my friends, oh my gosh, they've taken a very long time to get me to this point of openness, and like they've stuck by me. So they've worked hard to get to this point.
So that's so interesting. So how do you think they would describe you then?
The funny thing is, so as I'm writing this new chapter in this new book, I won't reveal the title just yet, but one of the chapters talks about emotions, and I'm doing a lot of reading and researching and writing at the same time, because normally they say research first, but I kind of mishmash everything because it's just me. And so one of the questions that I'm going to be writing about, that I have written already in the chapter, was about, why do I attract certain people in my life? I'm a big believer of everything happens for a reason, but I'm also a big believer of every person who comes into your life, it's a blessing and it's a lesson. So what can you learn from them? Because I'm constantly curious and hungry for learning. And so rather than delve too much into, what is this person teaching me? I actually sat down and I was like, who am I attracting? And it really does say, well, what energy am I putting out there? What lessons am I needing to look at right now? Looking at yourself in the mirror and just going, okay, you may not like this, this, and this, and that, but why? Or what do you do? What do you like? And the answer of that question, I don't think it's in the book actually, but the answer to that question was, I'm attracting kind, loving, open-hearted people. And for me to say, oh my gosh, I've reached this level where I have such incredible, loving, kind, generous, open hearted people in my life who genuinely do love me, I'm like, I've hit the jackpot. I've hit the lottery. Like, I'm done. I'm good.
That's really beautiful. Firstly, with that, is that something that you realized you had in your life? Like when you really sit down and think about it, you realize you have all these beautiful, kind, loving people?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
was that something that you thought, you reached a certain point in your life, you were attracting a certain type of person, people, and then you're constantly doing work on yourself, and then that starts to bring in new people? Or what, how did you realize which
Oh,
was which?
oh, that second part of the question. It's so funny because I've always, okay, let me correct what I'm about to say. I've not always appreciated the people in my life enough because I reckon as human beings, we're always wanting more. If we're single, we want to be married and we're in a couple. If we're in a couple, we're looking at our single friends. If we've got curly hair, we want straight hair, yada, 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 yada. The Western civilization is all about service and materialism. It's based on money, right? It's an exchange. So for a lot of people it's almost like, okay, so I want this, I need this. The consumer industry is saying, well, you're not quite good enough until you get this product. So for me, who was looking for love and wanting a relationship, I was like, well, wait a second, how can I cultivate the relationships and the love that I already have? And that's when, like, COVID's been like a huge year since 2020. This whole like new version of me has come out. And I feel like the people who knew me before 2020 are the people who I'm kind of like saying I've filled with kindness and love and open heartedness, because my friendship circle hasn't really changed. I've met a lot of people, but those people who I wrote down were the people who have been with me like for at least, I'd say, like 10 years or longer, or most of my life. So now I'm like going, well, wait a second, I've appreciated them because I've gone through this self discovery, this inner reflection. And now I'm at a point where I'm like, wait a second, they've taught me way more than I've ever got to this point. Now I'm just like, well, wait a second, did I attract that? Or was I supposed to learn all of these things through them? So I don't know. It's very deep in the first 5 minutes of
I
these.
love this. It's so good. Well, then how do you the next question is, how do you define yourself, who you are, and then next, what you do? I feel like this all flows really well.
It does. And it's so funny because when you sent me the questions, you were like, who are you? And it's so funny because, again, I wrote about this in the chapter. Like, we often describe ourselves as, oh, I'm a coach, or I'm
Mm.
this, or this is my name, or this is where I come from, this is my country, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, my answer was going to be, well, it is, it's who I am as a person. I'm somebody who's authentic, who's now more honest, who's very loyal to her friends and family, who is kind, who is loving, who's creative, who's a visionary. I, love having all those different aspects of who I am. I feel like rather than it saying, this is what I do, it's like, no, this is who I am. So I feel like that's who I am.
Yeah, I love that. And it's the same for me, like learning that whole, we are not what we do, we are who
Mhm.
we are. And I'm still in that process of trying to figure out, certain things and what makes me me and what makes me come alive. And yeah, that whole process is so interesting because we can really put our entire identity around the thing that we do, as
Mhm.
opposed to who we are and what we bring in relationships and friendships. And um, it's such an interesting thing.
Well, don't get me wrong. I think that this revelation has come from saying, I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I'm an area manager. I work for so and so team. And oh, now I'm getting my UKSA. Now I've got my masters. And it was always about my next goal. And when I reached the next goal, it was always about the next one. And I feel like because I've gone through that challenge of then going, that's not really who I am. Like, those are the things that I've accomplished. But actually, who really cares? Like right now, I'm trying to get more and more present. And I'm listening to this one book called Untethered Soul. You may have heard of it. It's like a international bestseller. So I've been putting off reading it. And Spotify, I was going to say to my mum, can you bring the book when we go on holiday? And then all of a sudden Spotify's like, oh, here's a free audio version. I was like, are you kidding me? This is awesome.
Thank you,
Just what I wanted
universe.
to, I know, just what I wanted to, when I'm ready to receive it, it comes.
Yeah.
And so I started listening to it. And then it basically was saying about presence. And it says, we are one speck. We are one, like literally, there's this tiny speck that's just floating around. We're one speck in the entire universe, like within one galaxy. Even if we see a star outside of our window, we're seeing a galaxy as a star, and how many billions of stars are in that galaxy. So it's almost like going, take yourself out of your headspace, take yourself out of those thoughts. They are so erratic and irrelevant, and we're only here for this one time. So what are we doing with that? And that's coming from a very anxious, depressed person. Like I used to have all of these things in my past, and it's a different version of me, I feel.
So, what's this version of you?
Happy.
Good.
Happy. Yeah. Happiness Within was just a very appropriate title to getting to where I was, to learning all of these challenges, to overcoming them, to using tools that I use these days to enhance that happiness.
What were your challenges?
Oh my goodness. I don't think they're very different to everybody else's. I feel like we think that we're really special and we think that we're very unique, but it's almost like, I got to a stage of burnout, and that's in the book. I got to a stage of uh, just not feeling like I fit in certain places. I felt picked on and laughed out at certain times in my life, and just trying to discover who I was, who I am now, because I had a series of, well, there was some tragic losses as when I was younger, and I hadn't mentioned in this book, but I probably will in this new one about sexual abuse. And these stories are not new. Like if you listen to different people, if you read their biographies, like some of these challenges aren't new. So for me, I'm just like, well, how can I write it in the book so other people can probably identify with, they may have had anxiety too. They may have had, you know, panic attacks. They may have had depression. And for me, I didn't know what that was when I was experiencing them. I just thought I was about to die because I was having a heart attack, and that's how it felt. But like until you read more and you know more and you understand more, then you can kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, I get it now. I get what was happening at that time. Like, what did I learn from it?
Mm. In hindsight, you can look back and go, yeah, what did I learn from it? But during what you said, you obviously through these challenges, you then had the tools, or learnt the tools to overcome them. How did you, number one, I guess, be brave enough to face the fact that there's help that's needed. You needed to work on yourself. Something needed to change at least to move forward. And then what were those tools?
It's really funny you asked that as well, because it's a great question. For me, it was more about my friends, like one friend in particular. I'm not really in contact with her. Well, I'm not in contact with her anymore. We've kind of parted way. But the one friend that I'll still hold high regard to is that person who was a friend who persevered, who saw the hurt, who saw the pain, and just kept chipping away. Right. And it was almost like, I know there's a good person in you. I know she's full of heart and joy and love and kindness. And so, I feel like sometimes we're mirrors to each other, but we see so many of our friends and family in such good light that we're like, well, where does that come from? if we can recognize it in others, we're missing it, recognizing it in ourselves. So it was a combination between, having friends who actually believed in me more than I did myself, but didn't ram it down my throat. And it was almost like, I'm just going to stay by you. And if you're feeling crap, it's okay because I'm right here, just in case. And I was the type of person who always journaled, always, always, always writing, always typing, always doing something, because that's how I process things. So I learned not to rely on somebody else because I always relied on myself. And so a lot of people probably had this thing of, well, I don't need to rely on somebody else because I work through my problems and processes. So even my friend back then had a really hard time because I would update her in my life. And she was like, well, why didn't you tell me? I could have helped you with that. And I was like, I've already helped myself. Like, I'm fine. I'm just updating you. But she wanted to be there before and during the process. And I didn't understand that because I couldn't have that level of openness within myself. So it was understanding, I'm a coach. People open up to me all the time, but it was very one way. And I realized that people open up to you without you having to reciprocate, without you having to be vulnerable. For me, I had to really work at being vulnerable, at being open. Like, we wouldn't have had this conversation 5 years ago. Like, just not at all. This just wouldn't happen. I wouldn't even be on screen. So how things change from 5 years ago to now, where I'm like, I'm open and honest talking about this. But the biggest thing for me, Happiness Within, the first book, I know we'll go on about it, but that was a process for me. That was going, oh crap, I'm putting this down and I'm processing it. Like, I didn't fully process it in the moment. So I ended up processing it during my writing phase. And as I'm writing it, it's kind of like verbal diarrhea on the page, because it was like, I like journaling. I like writing. And then when it came to editing, or then when I'm, reviewing it, I'm like, do people really need to know this? Like, oh, who's going to listen? Like, not so much who's going to listen or read, but it was almost like, I think I made a disclaimer on another podcast and I said, I'm really sorry for any friends who've known me for like a very long time, because the book is going to show you how much more I probably didn't let you in. And for me, I'm like, if you read the book, you're going to get to know me. But as a friend, they've had some hard times to try and get to know like those details.
Did they just call you up and were like, who are you?
No.
No.
I haven't had those phone calls just yet.
That must have been a really confronting process for you personally to go through that all at once. Or do you feel like it was something that was building for you and that was cathartic?
No, it was building, because as I was writing, so I ended up having the idea of the book back in 2018, and then I didn't actually put anything really tangible together until the end of 2019, and that was, just before COVID. I had left Mercedes as my role. I'm sure we're going to go into that, but the timeline for the book was basically saying, okay, now I've got time to just kind of ease back on my workload. As I was easing back, I gave myself 4 days off, basically. That was my ease off my workload. I gave myself 4 days off, and I gave myself a target of write 1,000 words a day. And within the 1,000 words a day target, I ended up finishing my book within 2.5 months. It's insane. Like, I'm just that type of personality.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough.
Because I had nothing else to do. I'm like, well, I'm not working right now. And funnily enough, that's when COVID hit. So just as COVID hit, then I'm kind of like, I sat on editing for a while, but as I'm going through the editing, and there were still some chapters that were missing, I'm reading my story and I'm still feeling those emotions. So that means I didn't process it at the time that it was happening. I didn't process it at the time I was writing it. I kind of did. And then I was processing it again as I'm editing. Then when I finally got an editor last year, so this was in 2022, I was still processing because I'm like, oh, I don't know if this should be there. And my editor were like, can you expand on this a little bit more? Oh, can you share this? And I'm like, oh no. So I feel like when I actually experienced that event or challenge or circumstance, and I'm talking about stuff in high school now, stuff in like junior school. And so things that we don't process sits in our body. It sits as an emotional energy center, and it presses every time something similar comes up in our life. It's being pressed. So then the whole emotions and the whole feelings come up again, and that's why they seem so familiar to you, or you hold them tight to your body because you're like, well, this is familiar. This is what I see. I told you this person is going to cheat on me, or I told you this person is going to do this. And they're just familiar patterns that we get used to. So for me, that was a very long process to get to this point where I can talk about it and be honest and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm good with it now. I can read it out, I think, in public.
Yeah.
And I know hopefully I've got to that point where I'm like, yeah, I'm actually okay with it. It doesn't trigger an emotional response to me anymore.
That's fantastic, firstly. I
Thank
mean,
you.
yeah, that's a huge achievement. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but we've all got shit going on in our lives, and we've all experienced stuff that we don't deserve, or is just really tough and awful. And it's so easy to compartmentalize it in a little box in the corner of your brain and just never visit it again. Um, but it does affect you without you even knowing it at times.
And the
Um,
thing is, like with this distracted world, we've got so many distractions, right?
mm,
You've got your family to take care of. You've got to work 8 hours, maybe 10 hours a day. And then you've got to come home and sort the house out. And then you've got to do other things. Then you've got your hobbies. Then you've got your friends. Then you've got your other family. And you are so distracted that we end up choosing not to deal with it, to keep it in that box.
mm,
But when that challenge arises or something similar will trigger that same emotion, that's when you're just like, well, what are you learning from this?
mm,
Are you able to then either go get therapy, go talk to a friend, go get some tangible results from that's something that's happened to you. And sometimes our body actually, it's so friggin' intelligent. Our body compartmentalizes it because we're unable to handle it at that time.
yeah.
So this is why people who've had trauma when they were younger, it doesn't actually open up until they're in adulthood. And when does it open up? Is when they feel safe. It's when they feel comfortable. But that's when it opens up because their body is going, oh, you know what? I feel okay now.
Mm,
Because I feel okay, that's when I can handle it. But
yeah.
the brain is like, what the F has just happened?
You said you're a writer. Obviously, you've written a book. You journal a lot. Would you say that is, or could be, one way that we could work through traumas? Obviously, when we're ready and the body is ready to heal, or is your way, your path, your journey, is that anomaly? Is that something that um, you know it's just unique to you, or would you say that's a good way to start if someone's going like, there is no way I'm speaking to anyone about this?
It depends upon the person because I feel like what works for me doesn't necessarily work for another person because of their experience, because of their background, because of probably the severity or the difference in the challenge or the trauma or the triggers, whatever they are. And so for me, Jackie, you've been dancing most of your life, and you had that avenue to exert and expel this energy. That is such a beautiful way to shift energy in the body. So the reason that we say move your body, go out in nature, do some meditation, do some breath work. And those tools, are in my book. But it's saying what your tools will be relevant to your situation and your circumstance, right? You can't just get up and dance in the middle of the office because you want to take out some energy. What can you do at that point that serves you and the challenge or whatever lays ahead of you at that time? So like I was saying, as an example for you, Jackie, you may feel that if you're going through a challenging moment, dancing it out, moving your body, shedding that stuck energy or emotion could actually really benefit you. Somebody else could be, I just need to talk to my best friend. Somebody else could be, I want to lay on the couch for a few hours and just cry. Somebody else could be like, you know what? I'm going to go hike a mountain for 5 hours on my own. And so I think that it really depends upon who you are, but understanding what works for you and make that an enjoyable task. Like rather than it going, oh, great, now I have to figure out on my own. Well, no, oh, great, I get to figure this out on my own. What works for me and what tools will I learn in the process and will keep learning? Because something that will help you now may not help you in 10 years. Like the challenges will change, right? But it could. It could be like, you know what? I do want to just dance in my living room and that's going to help me feel better.
And I do dance. Like
Yay.
literally it's I'll tell you a story that I found so I mean, I was shocked in this moment, and it was an organized thing. It was actually at a business retreat that I went to, and they didn't tell anyone what they had planned for us, because I think if they did, no one would have showed up. So what we actually did was blind, I don't know if you call it something now, whatever it is, but we were basically blindfolded and we danced. It was blindfolded dancing.
Love it.
Yeah, but the thing was, the music and the song choices were curated in a way that took you on this journey, and it was just I kid you not, like they were saying, if before we got started, if if it gets too much for you, you need to sit down, just put your hand up or just stop. It's fine. Um, and I'm listening to them. I'm like, what are they talking about? Anyway, the blindfold is on and the music is on, and she's also talking us through what she wants us to contemplate and think about or ask ourselves as this music is going and as it's building. And oh my god, the release I had, like I started crying, and I'm
Wow.
just like, where the heck is this coming from? And some for someone like me who is a dancer, who loves to dance and just get up, like that was just so shocking to me. And what it brought to the forefront of my mind was the fact that we do hold
Mhm.
so much, you know, trauma, tension, past memories, experiences within our bodies. We suppress that and we pretend it's not there. And, sometimes we don't pretend. Sometimes we really don't know it's there, obviously, as you just said. And like you've said, with that movement, it moves that energy. And in that moment, I just realized that, even when I move through life full steam ahead because I think I have to, and probably, if I'm honest with myself, if I stop, then I know could be stopping for a long while with things that I'll need to deal with head on. But it just, yeah, it showed me that we need to, I guess, nurture that part of ourselves a little bit more than what we do, because I think if we did, we'd be better off.
Oh,
Um,
100%.
yeah, there'd just be less, I guess, tension. If we could describe it, we could put an energy to it, that tension within ourselves. And we know if we think about it biomechanically, tension in the body, you're not going to be able to produce a movement well enough or lift well enough or whatever it is. It's the same with energy, right?
100%. And this is the thing. It's almost like if we're kinder to ourselves, if we're more loving to ourselves, how much more loving and kind are we to others? There are studies, physiological studies with people who embody certain energies, and this can be tracked, scientifically. We can have a look at the energies that are emanating out of individuals' bodies, and this is saying that if you're in this element of a low vibration of energies like fear or guilt or shame, their muscle exertion is far less, so they won't be able to exert that much more power or strength. But if they're in the feeling of peace, of happiness, of joy, of love, their muscle tension actually increases, their strength increases, their endurance increases. So why is it that when people say, oh, I get so much more motivation from music? It's because music has unlocked something within you that excels and increases that energetic vibration. So, but people don't think about it that way. Not everybody does anyway.
I think we all just need a hug. I think if we just got a hug.
Yes, exactly. But like me, I didn't sometimes.
Oh, still?
I am
You
now.
are now. Oh, good. Thank goodness. I want to touch on your
Yeah.
coaching, because you have sprinkled that in this conversation a little, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. Firstly, though, are you still coaching?
Technically, yes.
Okay,
So technically,
cool.
yeah. What were you going to say?
I was going to say we'll come back
Oh,
to
okay.
that. Let's park that
Okay.
conversation and let's go into your coaching for the moment, because yeah, you mentioned Mercedes
Hmm.
as well, Formula
Hmm.
One. Well, actually, you didn't mention Formula One. You mentioned that to me the last time we spoke, and I'm bringing it up
Okay.
now because I find this really
Okay.
fascinating. Like, how many strength and conditioning coaches does a person who's driving a car, and of course, it's a very high-powered car. Like, what are you doing? What yeah, tell us everything.
Okay. So just to be totally transparent, I started working with Mercedes as the gym manager and a coach. So I ended up taking on, observing what the gym layout was like, as a gym manager, like what is the best way to get more people to enjoy their workouts. And as I stepped into that gym, it was more a case of, oh my goodness, this looks like a leisure center gym from the 1990s. Like it was just full of equipment. The thing is, Formula One, as we know it, for those who don't know, it's a highly technological, advanced sport. So they churn out these beautifully engineered, pieces of equipment in a fraction of a time for it to be used in their car, which can travel over 220, over 230 miles an hour. So when you think about things like that, the advancement of technology, they even take things from aeronautical and space engineering so they can make their cars faster. But then you're thinking about this and you're looking at the gym, and this is how I observed it. I'm just like, well, this is not very technological advanced. How are we not able to look at human performance in this way? And this is where I felt like, because I was focused more on the factory staff, and there was over 1,000 people in the factory. So I was then looking at the minute amount of people who were going to the gym, who liked going to the gym, who were members of that gym. But then you look at the driver performance coaches, and it's all about that integration of human performance. Like we know that drivers have to have specific training for their endurance, for their neck strengthening, because the amount of G forces that they go through in the cornering speeds, they go through a race for like 90 odd minutes sometimes, and they can lose between 4 to 6 kilograms of weight. And so when you're looking at a physically exertion of an athlete, they are athletes. And then you are going to program and train them, with that knowledge. How do we increase the endurance with their weight? Weight used to be a huge issue in Formula One. Drivers couldn't put on weight because what they needed to do with a car is when a driver is below a certain weight, and I think it was like 65 kilograms, that's like I'm 60 kilograms. And so it's
Mm.
almost like they had to be so low in their weight. It was actually a regulation. Like some sports, you have to be a certain weight to compete in a certain category, like boxing or weightlifting, for example. So with Formula One drivers, they had this regulation. They needed to be under a certain weight. So then you're not really allowed to build muscle mass or be heavy. And the idea was the whole technical side of Formula One is the car and the driver need to be under a certain weight. So there was never really a driver needs to be under this certain weight. It needs the car and the driver. And then what people ended up taking from that knowledge is, you know what? If our driver weighs less and is smaller, it's going to be better for us, just like a jockey on a horse. It's going to be better because of the aerodynamics. It's going to be better for us because now we've got more ability to use the weight distribution in the car. So we know there is no center of mass when the driver goes into the car because it needs to be distributed across the whole car so it can have better downforce so the car can go faster. That's basically what it is. Now, in these days, they don't have they do have a weight limit, pardon me, but they've increased the weight limit. So the drivers don't actually need to be under a certain specific kilogram. They can kind of distribute it a little bit better within the car. So there were very questionable things that were happening, in hot races like Singapore or Malaysia that they used to race in, because the humidity and the heat used to be so high. You're now talking about, you're probably going to go beyond that 90 minutes, but you're in a sauna essentially because you have to have layers of, the heat proof overgarments, and then you've got your race suit, and then you've got all of these things on top of you. So it's almost like it's a safety mechanism, but also you're putting the driver's health and wellness at risk because now they have to be under a certain weight. So obviously that's moved away now. They don't have to be under a certain weight, but they are still very light people. They are still small people. If you see a person live, if you see a driver in person, you're probably going to be like, they actually are quite tiny. And there's not that many tall people in sport because, again, they need to have that weight distribution, and it's a lot difficult for taller drivers. But this is basically just saying I found Formula One interesting because I followed it from a very young age. And then coming into it, I knew, okay, I wasn't a driver coach. I did help some drivers because I was speaking to the coaches and I was traveling a little bit. So I really did enjoy that side of physical human performance. But my role in Formula One was, how do I look after the mechanics? How do I look after the team? How do I look after the engineers? How do I look after the directors? Because all of them are important, not just that one driver in the car. If you look at the one driver, cannot be able to drive that car if it wasn't for the 1,000 people who've worked on that car, whether it's in IT, whether it's in human resources, whether it's in, travel. They are all important. So it's almost like, it's like with everyone, every single person is important. What are you doing to enhance your physical preparation and performance? So when you do work on the car, when you do work 12 hours a day, or when you do travel for the race team, or you're doing the pit stops, you're enhancing your performance. And then when you go home, you've still got that energy for your kids. You've still got that time for your family. And that was my overall spectrum within the factory. It's like, how do we look at your overall sense of health and wellness? And there was no real set standards of when I went in there. And I love that type of job. I love going in there that there was never really a position. Nobody's actually done this role before when I came in. So when I came in and I was like, oh, why don't we do this? And why don't we do that? And why don't we increase our education? And why don't we have a look at the nutrition in the canteen? And why don't we have a look at education around all these other different elements of health and wellness and breath work and meditation and movement? So it's like saying you don't need to go into a gym and use a piece of machinery. You can now think in terms of, what does my body need? How do I need to move? What does mobility include? What does strength actually include? They didn't even have a bar to work with. So that was a long-winded way of saying that's what I did.
That blows my mind for such a prestigious sport and
Mhm.
company to not have this, 360-degree approach, this holistic approach to performance when they spend that time and money and energy and effort into the machinery and the technology. And yet, it takes an incredible, huge team of people to execute, you know, to the nth degree, everything so precise to get high performance, to win a race, whatever it is. And so that really is just so interesting to me. What I'd love to know firstly is, how long were you there, and what did you see in terms of when you did start to implement this holistic approach to performance? Um, were those outcomes, were they really tangible? Could you see the outcomes from what you
So
employed?
it's really funny because in a sport, and strength and conditioning is all about numbers, isn't it? And same in Formula One, it's all about numbers. How fast are you compared to your competition? How quick are you over a qualifying session? Because that could mean a fraction of a second. You could be pole or you could be 10th. Time and metrics matter in these types of two environments. I felt like the engineers needed more tangible data. Some of the other people just needed to feel better about themselves so they can travel well, so they can perform better in different races, so they wouldn't be affected so much with jet lag. So it's looking at all these different areas. And for me, I think that changing the gym in itself made a massive difference in terms of saying, you don't need to be in this machine and tell the machine what to do. You need to understand your own machinery. And when you're understanding physiologically what's happening to you, what your body is trying to tell you, then you can take those tools that we were giving, strength and mobility. And I didn't really do too much mindfulness with them, but it's actually saying, look, this is your strength, this is your conditioning, this is how we can drip feed it in throughout your sessions. And when I was working with the directors, they found that this type of training was supporting them. The biggest wins, I feel, were the people who ended up in surgery, who like couldn't do their sport or couldn't do their job because of that surgery, and then them coming back better than where they were before surgery. And even some of the surgeons had mentioned, how much their recovery had increased. With the race team, we had a look at their metrics regarding where the cholesterol levels were, where their blood pressure was, what their activity levels were. When I started in 2017, I would say like I started in the middle of the annual year, but really I was just starting when it came to the race calendar, for the Formula One race calendar. So for me, I'm like, well, wait a second, I don't want to change too many things, but what can I change that is very significant? When it came to the second official season of Formula One, I was then given the responsibility of the race team, which was amazing for me because I'm like, right, this is amazing because now I get to help their performance on the pit stops. And the funny thing is, they weren't focused on the pit stop times. I was, because I was like, okay, well, we don't really need to focus on the pit stop times, not really, because what are you doing for the majority of your week? Because the pit stops are going to be one fraction of that time on the race day. And the race day is pretty much their last day of work. So they start on the Wednesday. Sometimes they travel in on Wednesday. They'll have a fire up for the car on the Thursday. They'll have practice on a Friday. They've got qualifying and another practice on a Saturday. They race on Sunday. So all these days the mechanics are in and they're working on the car, and and that's if their car doesn't crash at any of those one points and they have to do extra work. Some guys were like, oh, I've got a really bad headache. Oh, I'm not feeling great. Well, did you drink? Did you actually hydrate today? No, I haven't had time. Forget about eating. Some people just wouldn't have time to eat because they were like, oh, I really need to shove this down because we're back working. And that's having that ability to travel with a team and understand that actually you're not focused on your physical wellness. You're not focused on your nutrition. You're not focused on all of these things that will benefit you. So how can we put those tools in place And what we found that there was an 80% rise in their physical activity from 2018 to 2019. There were more people taking part in physical fitness. Like either they were coming to the gym or they were running the racetrack or they were in the gym when they were traveling or, you know, we had programs for them. I didn't force them to do anything. I just said, look, you choose. Because if you don't want to do it, you don't need to do it. And I didn't convince anyone. What did convince them was they saw their mates getting better and fitter and stronger and healthier and happier. And they're like, oh, I want some of that. Oh, okay, I know the person I need to go to. So then they came to me and so, oh, okay, so I want to work out. Oh, what do I need to do? So for me, then I saw an increase in their physical activity. I saw their blood pressure go down. The amount of high risk, and we call high risks like blood pressure, cholesterol. Where were they? And we had quite a few high risk in 2018. And we have no more high risks in 2019, but we dropped the amount of people who are at high risk. And so for me, I'm like, that's a big deal. Because remember, even though the driver sees themselves as an athlete and has an athlete coach, they have an athlete coach, they've got a performance coach, they've got their physical activity sorted. But when you look at a mechanic, they're a mechanic first. They're not an athlete. They may do pit stops, but they're not an athlete and they never claim to be because they're like, well, I like doing my job. This is what I'm doing. So it's almost like saying, well, how can we enhance what you're doing and then elevate that to another level?
I love that so much. And it brings the focus to the fact that, you know, all these things are actually really easy to do, like improving our nutrition, like moving or, you know, walking more or you know, going into the gym, doing something, moving, that mobility, that like these are really, in comparison to what the elite athlete is doing, all this simple stuff is low hanging fruit when we really think about it.
Absolutely.
I have to ask one last question about Formula One. How do you improve a race car driver's endurance?
Oh, that's a really good question. So a lot of times, like working with a sauna, working just like cardiovascular sports. So you could be like racquetball or running or cycling, but it's like high endurance. So, but the running is kind of like it's going to impact your knees and your ankles. So it's like, how can you cycle that in, like, you know, for preparing for hot races, put a cycle in a sauna and basically annihilate them. And they've got loads of clothes on. If you've only got a gym available, run on
Oh,
the treadmill, do sprints. Like the cardiovascular wise, they are super fit. And we forget that actually strength supports our cardiovascular fitness anyway. Like, have you seen an Olympic lifter jump? Like NFL has got nothing on Olympic lifters, a vertical jump, because it's like, oh, you didn't think that somebody that big and that like bulky would jump so high. It's because of their performance.
I haven't seen that.
You
I
haven't?
mean,
Oh my god, you
I
should
mean,
check it
what?
out. That's something for you to like go into a rabbit hole on YouTube.
I mean, I've obviously I watched the CrossFit Games and they're massive and they're doing
Oh yeah, no,
unbelievable
same thing.
stuff. Okay,
Same
right.
thing.
Same sort of thing. Right, gotcha. My next
Yeah.
question for you, Tulsi, is all about your podcast with your friend and co-host Kelly, the Unapologetically You podcast, which by the way is a mouthful. I'm really glad I got that
But
out.
apparently, it's only a mouthful for Australians because Kelly has had trouble, and we've even put this in the
Oh,
podcast about her trying to do Unapologetically You. Apparently, you can only do it in a British accent.
yeah, I think we're just so lazy with our pronunciation. It just kind of all like rolls in the mouth and just gets lost. So it must be it. But please tell us, how did that come about for you?
Okay, so well, funnily enough, I knew Kelly from the beginning of my strength and conditioning career. So as I was saying, you know, I love writing. I was blogging for a very long time. I created my own website and I was really interested in other female S&C coaches. And that's how I basically got to know her. I was interviewing female strength and conditioning coaches before podcasts even happened. And I used to blog about it. I used to be like, this is a question and answer for a female S&C coaches, and she was one of the guests, I would say, or one of the, experts that I would ask. Years down the line, she was very, very open for me to, chat to her if I was going through something or if I needed anything. And for me, her openness and her kindness just radiated. So it was almost like no things were silly. If I was asking her about her experiences in sport, or like I said, I wasn't the type of person to go to others for help. But if there were things that were be relevant in terms of I can learn faster, then she was the person that I would go to. We ended up just enhancing our friendship. That was back in 2014, I want to say. Yeah, about 2014. And then years down the line, we started doing, just calls online, and then we would just catch up. And this was just like, it was a very long, drawn out period of dating between Kelly and I as friends. That's just me. It just takes a very long time. And so, I actually met her for the first time in 2020 because I was in Australia and she ended up flying down. I was in Melbourne. She flew down from Sydney, and we just spent a full day together. We were walking around Melbourne. We were eating. We were, like exploring shopping, just like having such a fun time. And the connection was still there. So I was like, we need to collaborate on something. This is amazing. This is insane. Like, we really do have brilliant minds that we can come together on a project. And later in 2020, I think it was like May or June time. So it's still, during that COVID period. Like I said, COVID was a big, big, big few
Mm-hmm.
ways of awakening. And we started Unapologetically You. First, it was about strength and conditioning coaches speaking to other people about the success in their life. And, as coaches do, you kind of just call your friends on as guests. And then you're like, oh, who are your friends? Who do you know? And then we kind of just like, it was like that 1 degree of separation, Kelly called it. So we can speak to more different coaches and different people who were doing good things, but needed to, be on the podcast. And then things kind of pivoted. We've been doing the podcast this is going to be our 5th season. So you actually came in on the 5th season. And so it's funny because it's kind of moved from interviewing strength and conditioning coaches or just people based on them. And now it's kind of, we've had this new layout of it being, what are your wins? What's brought you joy today? What's made you smile? And those little questions that we kind of enter into each podcast now. So this new phase has happened in the last year. So from season 4. And then it talks about a special hot topic. So it could be an article, or it could be something in the news, or it could be some hot topic in health and fitness, because we know that things kind of cycle back around as they do. And then sometimes we have a guest like we did with you, Jackie, and I feel like that kind of conversation between Kelly and I really does create magic. But then we're up against a whole different category of health and wellness space in the podcast world. So it kind of came about through friendship, and it's still come about through friendship, because I learned so much from Kelly. Honestly, I'm so privileged to have her as my friend and somebody who I get to collaborate with. So I'm just like, I get to do something I love, as a part of this. It's not a chore. Like, the editing can be, but it's not a chore. It's like, this is something that I really like to do. And you were saying on your previous podcast with your guest, what would you do if you needed to do it for free? And I am currently doing it for free. So it's like, I would still continue to do it because it brings me joy. It helps me learn more. And, being in that environment is pretty special. And hopefully our listeners get to have that tidbits too.
Yeah. Well, I think the most beautiful thing about listening to a podcast is obviously you are listening to people, you are learning, whether it is their knowledge that they're sharing, the wisdom that they're sharing, their experience that they're sharing. We get to learn and connect with you. And when you have two people, I really feel like the dynamic it is palpable. You can hear it, and um, that's so beautiful to be able to connect with that. I think you guys do that really well. I catch myself smiling because you guys are laughing and having an enjoyable conversation, but I'm enjoying it as well. Like, it's just contagious. It's really lovely. And I love hearing, how it's evolved as well, because, we all go through our own evolution, and to be able to go on that journey with someone is also really special. So that's really cool too.
Agree. And this is the thing. It's like, even for people who want to start a podcast, like I wanted to start a podcast years and years ago. I just didn't do it. And like everything, things just come back around when they're supposed to, right?
Yeah. So I've got two questions for you. Actually, one question for you, and then I would love for you to ask a question of this incredible listener. My question to you is, what advice do you have for coaches or trainers or health professionals or even athletes who want to get into high performance teams? What advice do you have for them?
So this is a really good question because first I remember reading the question on email and I was like, I don't know. I don't know. And then I took a moment and got outside of my headspace. And I was like, well, it's pretty much what I've literally said 2 seconds ago regarding the podcast. I love learning, but I feel like for anybody who is wanting and has an ambition to get into high performance, you can't stop learning. And that's whether you want to get into high performance or whether you want to become an engineer or you want to become a dancer or like whatever it is, you're always learning. If you're not growing from that lesson, if you're not able to learn more and hone your craft, well, it's only going to get you thus far. So it's almost like saying, well, is your degree enough just to get you that job? Okay, so if that job you want to sustain for like, I don't know, 20 or 30 years, that's fine. Don't keep learning. But eventually the company will go, well, how are you helping us to generate more innovation or creativity in your role as an engineer, right? So it's almost like saying, as a performance coach, you're constantly learning. Yeah, build a solid network, learn what you need to learn. And also stop asking people for things. That's one of my little tidbits. People, they don't really do it often with me, and they have done. I've had this experience where they'll just email a person and just go, oh, can you just tell me what can I do for this? Or what can I do for that? And it's like a bit like your question, right? How do you get into high performance? And rather than people wanting the answer, it's like, figure it out, be genuine, have questions because you want to get to know that person, not because of what that person can do for you. Don't just make a friend in high performance because they're like, oh, I know so and so can get me a leeway in this job or that. People spot BS and disingenuine people. So it's to build friendships because you are generally interested in this person. Are they a good person? Do you actually want to be affiliated? Do you want your energy around this person? Because they could be in elite performance, but they could be a really horrible person. Do you really want to waste your time with that type of energy just to be in that environment of high performance? Because high performance energy environment, it's very specific. You need to have a certain personality, kind of be a little bit more gritty, and some people can handle it, but not everybody can. It's just almost like I need to have that badge, or I need to get to this level of accolade. And when you get there, sometimes you're like,
Is that it?
I need to take my rose-colored glasses off because yeah, it's not that shiny.
Yeah. I'm so happy that you brought that to light, because from an outsider's perspective, you can just look in on that and it just seems so glamorous, right?
It does.
Um, but
Yeah,
I have experienced that. I mean, I've done a lot of contract work with a lot of elite teams of a lot of different sporting modalities. And there were some teams that, I hate to say it, that were awful to be in. And I didn't like the people. They weren't very nice. They weren't kind. They were rude. They were sexist, all of those things. And so, yeah, it is something that you're going to have to think about, and at least be aware of, so that if it is something that, you go into, and it reveals to you that it is that type of environment, then you've got a decision to make, and you need to take care of you as well.
And are you willing to compromise who you are to fit in with who they are and what they're doing?
That's a good question. But I have one more. Well, I want you to now. I'm going to hand it over to you. What one question do you have for this incredible listener to ask of themselves right now?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a difficult question. I really should have just meditated on this and thought about this a little bit more overnight. Let me think. What would you change between the old version of you and now? Like, would you change anything between then and now? In every decision you're making, are you being kind to yourself? Are you being open to yourself? Are you respecting and honoring yourself? And if you aren't, why? What are you compromising? So yeah.
I think that's really beautiful, because I think it brings a certain amount of awareness to the present, and understanding that, obviously you can't change the past, but you can change now and what happens in the future. And, if you didn't believe in yourself then, well, you better damn well believe in yourself now, because if that is the thing that you wish you did back then I
Mhm.
hope you're doing it now, sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, that awareness,
Yeah.
it's really important, and it's a really brave thing as well, to be able to have that awareness of something and then take action with it. So that's amazing.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I love that you said bring presence, because that's all we're trying to do. Like you said, we can't rewrite the past, but what we can do is create our future from this moment. Some people are worried about the future. I used to be worried about the future, but it's like the only thing I can create in my future is the action that I take right now. So, am I honoring this? Am I giving that 1% better? Am I being that 1% kinder? Am I able to just pause a little bit? Because even in the most emergency situations, you'll have a second to think about something.
Tulsi, this has been wonderful. I know we said you only had 10 minutes, and that was about, I think, 25 minutes ago. So you're
That's
awesome.
okay. That's cool.
Thank you so much for chatting with me today. As always, it's been so much fun and an absolute pleasure.
Jackie, I have no idea where the time has gone. Honestly, it feels like a snap of the fingers and time's just disappeared. It's been such a pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me on your Bodies Built Better podcast. I'm completely honored, and thank you for this opportunity.
Make sure you check out Tulsi. I'll have all of her links in the show notes, her Instagram and social handles, but also the Unapologetically You podcast as well. That is a mouthful. I really need to concentrate when I say the Unapologetically You podcast. Say that fast 5 times. That was so much fun. Make sure you check her out and support her and her podcast as well. If you love this episode, please share it with your friends. I would so appreciate that. And I appreciate you being here as always. Thank you so much. Have the best day. Stay awesome. And we'll catch you next time.